Hey there, welcome back to the Hall H Show podcast. We are recording this at San Diego Comic-Con 2019. I'm joined by a graphic designer, a fellow graphic designer, since I am one too. He's based out in Los Angeles, and he is Michael Dooley. He is the creative director of Michael Dooley Design, and he teaches history of design, comics, and animation at the Art Center College of Design and Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. And he is also a print contributor, editor, and author. So welcome to the show, Michael.
Oh, well, thank you. I will say hi as if we haven't been talking for the past 15 minutes already, and that sort of thing. And, you know, it's really great that you managed to get into the luxurious Hall H. I mean, here we are, this program, and here we are right on stage of Hall H. You know, people think, everybody's waiting outside, but it's really relatively easy to get. Aaron knows his stuff. It's like all you need is to know the right entrance and a pair of wire cutters, and you are in. So anyway, here we are on stage before everything starts, and it's really. Oh, can I tell you I actually have
Sure.
a Hall H
Okay.
story
Definitely.
this is back in 2006. I've been going to Comic-Con on and off since '75, and one of the old timers. And in 2006 was when I started going regularly because I had a book out I was promoting then. I had like 4 different panels I was doing that because the book had just been published. And so I was going around to the rooms and asking the people that helped set up, the tech people, if I could do a run through beforehand because I didn't want any delays. And I was thanking the guy who was helping me out, and I really appreciated him taking the time. And he said, "This is nothing. This is, compared to the people that come into Hall H, the kind of demands that they have." And at the time, 2006 was when there was Snakes on a Plane.
Oh,
and that sort of thing.
The Samuel Jackson movie, right?
Sam Jackson movie, and it was like he was saying, that they're, Hollywood people, they're just insane in their demands. They have no sense of reality and what's practical and safety rules and the rest of it. He said what they wanted to do was they wanted to take Hall H and put a big net across the entire ceiling of Hall H and fill it with rubber snakes.
Oh, wow.
And at a time like towards the end there was going to be this big dramatic thing where they just pull the net off and the netting off, and so all these snakes would fall off into the entire audience of.
Wow.
And it was like they were saying you have to do that, typical Hollywood, of course you can do anything. I got I'm rich, I can make things happen. And they were like, no, there was a lot of factors here, and it was what do you mean, don't you know who I am? And it's like so me saying would you please help me plug in my MacBook Pro and make sure that it projects okay. It was like, that's nothing.
Wow. Jeez.
So anyway,
that's an incredible story.
Oh yeah, and it was, and I was actually doing a panel at the time that Snakes on a Plane was going on, and the panel was sparsely populated. So I've got.
What was your panel about?
Oh, that one was at the. In addition to me having the book out that year, it was also, I was involved in Masters of American Comics, which 2005, 2006, that had started in LA. Basically, it was setting up a canon of the 15 most important people in comics, starting with Winsor McCay, and important in terms of being a significant innovator and having a significant effect on the medium of comics. And so it was at the Hammer Museum, which is where it was generated, and at the Museum of Contemporary Art in downtown LA. And so I had a panel with people that other people that were involved in it. It's like Craig Yo was one of the lenders. I had some people from the Hammer. I had people involved in putting together the show, and we were having a great, terrific, sparsely populated panel.
Mm-hmm.
And I blame it all on Sam and, and his damn stuff, which of course turned out to be not the greatest movie in the world. So take that.
You're talking about the 15 most. What was the list again?
The 15. Basically, yeah, it was setting up a canon of the 15 most innovative and influential comics artists the list would include people like George Harriman, Milt Caniff, Peanuts, Charles Schultz, Chester Gould, Dick Tracy, Frank King. Those were people at the Hammer. Those were the older versions, and then in the and then at the Museum of Contemporary Art, which is more concerned with contemporary things. Funny enough, that was where they were showing. It was basically the Hammer with the comic strips and the comic books, starting with the transitional figure of Will Eisner, were at the downtown place, and so it was Eisner, Jack Kirby, Harvey Kurtzman, Art Spiegelman, Gary Panter, and the last one finished off with Chris Ware, who's one of the guests here at Comic-Con this year, and so that. Those are most of the names in a nutshell, and it was one of those. It was fairly controversial because, as you know, everybody thinks they can, be a curator. So every comics geek with any kind of outlet was saying, this is terrible. How dare they include that and not this, that, and the other thing, and all that stuff. And so there was a lot of that kind of stupidity going on.
I mean, you're more than welcome to make your own list, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, the purpose of a canon is to start things. It was like nothing had ever been done like this before. And, if like literary canon, it's like, okay, yeah, you lay it out and, here are whatever, 15 white men for the past 100 years. And, since it included Harriman, they were, able to fudge it a bit and say, well, not entirely. But, nevertheless, it's like, let's get multiple canons, let's get women, which, becoming more and more important. And they, if you know Trina Robbins, that there are zillions of women cartoonists, comic strip and comic books, graphic novels, especially now. People are taking notice that, that have been sorely neglected, which, is one of the things that I take care of in my design history of comics and animation class at Art Center. Different ethnic, and then, eventually all those things will go away where you can just say, okay, these are the top people in the canon, and you won't have to stick them into categories and all. It's just expand it, and refine it in your own ways. But yeah, that was a great point. Yeah, let's all start making our own canon.
Well, at the very least, you started the conversation.
Yeah. And so, that was the thing. I was, my participation in that was, I was part of the programming. And it's like when they said, they wanted me to go, organize talks and panels. Of course, for me, the first person I thought of was Trina. And, so I got her down, to speak at the panel. So there was already, even within, the beginning of late 2005 when it started, there was Trina. They were able to, fly her down from the Bay Area, and she was able to talk about, she was able to give her point of view, and she was able to obviously, tell people, look, you want historical figures that were, doing breakthrough work and who were making a big influence. It's like, what about, this, that, and the other thing, from, Nell Brinkley and Rose O'Neill up until more recently. So, that was a particular program that I arranged that I'm particularly proud of. And, Trina's just she's wonderful, amazing font of knowledge, and really nice person.
Awesome.
So we actually on preview night we wound up sitting down for about an hour, catching up on
cool.
on things.
That's one thing about coming to San Diego Comic-Con is that you see people that, I mean, obviously you haven't seen in a while because a lot of the friends that I've made here at Comic-Con, they come from abroad, like they're from the East Coast or they come from another country. So, I mean, we may interact and keep in touch online, but there is something about that, having that face-to-face, interaction, just to catch up. I mean, which is one reason why most of our podcast interviews are face-to-face rather than through Skype, because I enjoy that sort of interaction, because you sort of pick up on things that you couldn't pick up on a Skype call.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you, even visually, you can't see what a spiffy shirt that Aaron's wearing.
And the spiffy shirt was designed by my friend Tony B. Kim from Hero Within. So if you're at a convention, please go check out their booth, Hero Within. So
this is something. That this is a big part of it for me. And I wind up spending so much time. I mean, for me, one of the old guys. 1975. It's like the first time I'm meeting Scott Shaw and all those people that I would continue to meet. I mean, now Scott, he's been one of my guests a couple of times at my Art Center class, but just people. I mean, because he's local, and but people from around the country and the world, like you say, I wound up. Again, preview night, I bumped into Danny Fingeroth and wound up talking with him for an hour. He's got all sorts of things coming out, including a book, a 400-page biography of Jack Kirby, which unauthorized. So this is going to be very interesting. Anyway, so you catch up on stuff like that, and that's such a big part of it. I mean, it was like that at first when I was going to design conferences, like the AIGA conference. That was one of those things where you get to see the people, in New York and across the country at those things. I don't go to those so much. I'm just finding out that comics conventions are so much more fun than than design. Design. Yeah, it's they're more into the marketing and branding sort of thing rather than for me it's about the art. It's visual. Even my class at Art Center, design history of comics and animation. It's like I focus on the design. And which is not, in terms of historians and scholars and academics and like that, it's one of those things that, in the next couple of days, I'm not going to be going to that many. You know about how the Comics Arts Conference is structured, where that's like a part of San Diego Comic-Con that allows them tax exemption, I don't know exactly all the details, but that sort of thing. So they're, a regular part of...
I see, as an educational sort of...
Exactly, an educational. And so what they do is they have the academics, scholars come that... I tell my students at my graphic design history and at my comics history class, I'm not an academic, but I'm going to play one in front of you for the next 16 weeks. And the problem with them for me, and I've just noticed for the past years, it's like 90+%. Sometimes 100% of their talks, are approaching it from the literary standpoint. It's like, they're all about the novel in graphic novels, and the graphic part of it, which is 50% of the words, pretty much gets ignored. Everybody, and the scholars are coming from, they're coming from, the literature department, the English department, that sort of thing, so they don't take anywhere near into consideration the combination, the dynamics of the visual and the verbal, the word and image, which as a graphic designer, baby, that's what it's all about, right? Right. Yeah. So, I was hoping to see an improvement. Excuse me. Hoping to see improvement this year, but no. Anyway, yes. So
what could they do to improve? What are your suggestions?
Well, let's see. They just to be self-aggrandizing, they have had me in the past, but then I was proposing it. Maybe I'm part of the problem, and that I should be actively working to propose to get back into because I've given Comic-Con talks that really have that focus. And and so that's just maybe all the Comics Arts Conference people who are in charge will be listening to this podcast, and so you're doing your part as well. But yeah, just if more people, if more people who were had the interest in, oh my gosh, hope you can edit that. Had the interest in the word image, dynamic, more so, and just that they realize that. They take a look at their programming, and it's for the past several years it's been from 0 to 2 of their multiple talks have really included the art, the design, the visual aspect, or just barely recognized it in any event. Anyway, there's so much for that rant, but in any event, yeah. So. Anyway, moving on. I mean, there are plenty of other things going on, so it's like, no big loss for me there.
You mentioned Jack Kirby earlier. Did you know Jack Kirby personally?
No, I didn't. But Danny's got a lot of connections. Danny worked with Danny Fingeroth. Has worked on the book with Jack's brother. And all. I mean, it's to, I say no, I put in quotes because obviously if I was going to Comic-Con in 1975, it's like, there was Jack walking, the halls of, the El Cortez and the other place they were at before here. And, back in, the day, I'm not going to get into a I'm not going to go off into another rant about it, how Comic-Con has gone down the tubes, because I still love it. I still, it's like, from morning to night, I find plenty of stuff to do, that don't involve, whatever this year's version of Snakes on a Plane is. And so, yeah, and it would just be so casual. You'd see them and you'd talk with them, if you wanted to. And
well, I mean, to be honest, Jack Kirby did sort of prophesize that this is what Comic-Con would eventually be like, right?
Right. Yeah. Pop culture con. Yeah. That sort of thing. Which is, being able to walk around and see these people reminds me of my first. The first comic book convention I went to that, was back in 1972. This was, at this time I was living in New York, which is where I grew up, and I didn't even know there was such a thing. And then I heard about this EC Fan Addict convention happening in New York, and I went to that, which is, that's legendary. I mean, and my first time there was just awestruck at, there they all were. No need to mention, your audience knows all the names, and of the EC people, in addition to Spiegelman and people like that being there. And it was, it was something that, in retrospect, the importance of Harvey Kurtzman has grown on me since then. I'm just really sorry that I didn't have time, that I was able to sit. Well, not just time. I was just, pretty much a kid there, just, in awe of everybody. And Harvey's become just so important in my life. He has been important in my life since I was 7 years old, and I picked up my first Mad, the comic book. And so yeah, he's on the top of. In fact, just to jump back to 2005, the Masters of American Comic Show. One of the things that I did was I took a 1 hour walk around about where I talked about Harvey Kurtzman at the Museum of Contemporary Art, and I walked around and to all the other people that were shown there, the 6 or 7 other people, from Eisner to Chris Ware, and I was able to point out, it's like, okay, here's where Kurtzman comes in to, so many of these people, that he was so much a part of his time, and he was so influential. It's just amazing. I mean, I could do an entire 16-week class just on Harvey.
There you go. That'll be on your next syllabus.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I'll sell that too. I was surprised how easy it was to sell the class in the first place. Because when I started out, I was teaching history of design at LMU, Loyola Marymount University, and then at Art Center, but it's like one of the things I've been doing graphic design all my professional career, but I've been doing comics since I was 2-3 years old, and so I always had in the back of my mind, man, I gotta really want to teach a history of comics class, and it was something that finally got a kick in the rear when the Charlie Hebdo hits happened, the murders of the 4 cartoon, a dozen people altogether, January 7th, 2015, and it was like that. My print column, I wound up writing. I had one column out about the Hebdo situation the first week, and I did several after that because that's pretty much all I can think about. And then it was like, okay, that was my own kick in the butt, was to go, okay, it's time to propose a history of comics class, and so I went to the dean of my department, gave her the pitch, and she was very amenable. It was like so surprising, and it was like, put together syllabus, lesson plan, that sort of thing, and I did, and hey, sold, and and of course, because there was still that whole idea of whether you can show Muhammad. I said, well, this history class is going to include me talking about, because that's what it was all about for me. The importance, the significance that political cartoons still have in our day. Even though you have the comedy shows, which are also great. And so I asked her. I said, do I have to? The term back then was trigger warning. I said, do I have to put a trigger warning in my syllabus? And she was just like, go ahead. You can handle it. You know what to do. So I didn't have to bother with that. And so since then, I've had some great discussions, and more and more about that, about Hebdo and the other. I preferred that thematically my classes all have topics of some sort of controversy and that sort of thing, in addition to my guest speakers. These are great.
Right. Now maybe we can backtrack a little bit.
Sure.
And we were talking a little bit earlier, and you grew up in New York.
Yes.
So maybe you can tell us about your childhood a little bit. Maybe what you were into, what you read.
Oh yeah, well, just to continue on with Harvey Kurtzman, and me being 7 years old and picking up this is actually one of those things where I was where I found my way into graphic design because of Kurtzman. Okay. And it was a particular issue in 1955, the issue of Mad, in which he did the parody on the cover of the Johnson & Smith ads, those minuscule classified ads. There were just like a zillion of them on the cover, and the actual Mad cover was up in the corner, teeny tiny, where you could barely see it. And it was on the front of the magazine. It was like, for me, it was like, oh yeah, I know those Johnson Smith ads, because I was reading, whatever the Dell comics and the Harvey comics and that sort of stuff. And it was like, at the first time, it's like, oh, there's a mind behind these. There's a sensibility behind these. And it was like, the comics just don't appear out of nowhere. It's not just something that, whatever Dell Comics turns on the printing press, and out comes Uncle Scrooge, and so it was that, and just like going into that whole, I just spent, just hours and hours, going through, the first one, the opening one was Popeye with the great Will Elder, and just all these sensibilities, all these things that I recognize, and it was like, okay, not only is there a mind that's actually designing these things, or several minds, but there's also an attitude. And it was like to find that kind of satire, to me, it was like, the mid 50s, that was, socially, politically, a terrible era in terms of, what you could and should be thinking about and that sort of thing, that whole, McCarthyism, Red Scare, vulgar stain in our history. And, it was people like Kurtzman and Elder that really just, opened my eyes to that, yeah, you don't have to accept, everything that you're handed down. And it's something that, it's not only made me conscious of graphic design before I knew such a word existed,
right.
It also took care of helping to develop my my attitude in terms of just my life. And so it was one of those things where coincidentally it was a time when I was 7. It was my dad had actually left. There was a separation, divorce. So it was my mom bringing up my brother and me. And I'm realizing in retrospect that basically Harvey Kurtzman became my dad when I was 7 years old. And my brother, Kevin Dooley, who's also in the comics business, or was, he remembers me reading comics to him when he was when he was just like a couple of years old. And so he would, and it was like he even remembers. Kevin Dooley, by the way, was an editor at DC Comics in the 1990s for about a dozen years, and he was even remembering how when we were going through these comics that I'd always be pointing out the art and the panels, the construction on the page and that sort of thing, and he'd always be pointing at, well, why is this person doing this? Wouldn't it be better if? And it was like, there he was, like, a little kid. He was already editing comics, and so it also it just instilled his passion to read. Like Spiegelman says that comics are a gateway drug, and so yeah, Kevin. Yeah, he's another story. Oh, and Kevin is going to be for the first time in decades. Kevin is going to be speaking at next year's San Diego Comic Fest.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, he's coming out of and he was not to go into it too much unless you're interested. He's a fairly controversial
How so?
figure in his days. Well, he made a lot of changes. I guess the short thing, the thing that he's most notorious for was the move he made on Green Lantern, to which managed to get him and the other people who worked on it death threats, because it's like Green Lantern's been my hero since I was a wee lad, and how usually lad, right? And how dare you go the parallax route, that sort of thing.
Oh, I see.
And so and so I mean it was it was one of those things where Green Lantern had lost a lot of energy, and it's like, on the other hand, from the from the sales standpoint, it was like DC sold a boatload of the comics that he had edited. I mean, him and the other people who were working on it as well were also getting, and so then it was like so
I don't. Well, I mean, there was a time period where I didn't read comics for such a long time, and I mean, I don't remember that parallax story causing such an uproar.
Oh yeah. It was in his time, and you can hear about it for about an hour next March or April, whenever Comic Fest, because you go to that, right? Yeah. Okay, so you'll be seeing him.
Will you be there too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I've actually just pitched to Matt a day or two ago. Pitched an idea for a panel that
Nice.
I'll be following up on.
Cool.
That sort of thing. So I mean, okay, so that was like really early childhood, and and again, so Queens, and then Brooklyn. from 1965 to 70, I went. I was at Pratt Institute. Getting my degree there, and design degree.
That's a prestigious place.
I what?
That's a pretty prestigious place.
Oh yeah, in its time it was just. I mean, 1965 to 70 in New York. Really, this was. There were. Obviously I was. Part of that whole scene. I was in the early planning stages of the Yippies' invasion of the Chicago presidential convention. I couldn't go myself. It was in the summer. I was working, but there were planning strategies going on there, and and it was the march to the United Nations to hear Martin Luther King speak, all this sort of thing. And I would, hang around with on the protests. I'd hang around with the Vietnam veterans against the war and just really hear, some firsthand stories. And, this relates to comics in the sense that, of course, that era, that was the birth of the underground comics, which again, the underground comics are another, huge offspring of Harvey Kurtzman, that sort of thing, as Crumb and Spiegelman and anybody else will tell you. So it's really good. Oh, and the Air Pirates. People keep forgetting about Dan O'Neill and the Air Pirates. They were. I mean, for me, it was like Zap the comic. That was okay. That was a mixed bag. I wasn't that crazy about a lot of what they did, but pretty much Dan O'Neill and the Air Pirates. That was a real solid. To me, that was really truly carrying on that Harvey Kurtzman parody sensibility. To the point of doing the best they could to really tick off Walt Disney, that sort of thing. So that alone in itself. And again, this is all. For me, filtered through my ideas that I got following Mad. So yeah, as a kid, I just would. It was from Mad to Trump to Humbug to Help to entering my puberty with Little Annie Fanny, which is really weird because I never felt that attracted to Annie Fanny for all sorts of reasons. And, it was kind of, it was sad to see this is where Harvey ended up, for the, however, many decades of his life, but I was happy that he was doing well, financially, right. That sort of thing. So yeah, this was if you want to put a through line through that childhood growing up, in New York, it would be good old Harv, that sort of thing.
So how did you segue to like the sort of more traditional graphic design world?
Well, for me, I didn't. It was just design was one of those things where I have a cousin, Steve Degnan, who had gone to Pratt, and so I was in high school. I went to Catholic grade school and high school. I mean, this is like Orthodox Catholic uniform, very strict. So. Again, thank God for the cynicism that Harvey helped me develop. So I led a fairly secluded life, and it was just like I hadn't even in the midst of high school, I hadn't even really thought that much about a career until one time my geography teacher actually caught me drawing caricatures of people, just like drawing in, people drawing their textbooks and that sort of thing. And this guy, he was a lay teacher, Mr. O'Mara. He was a terror. He was the kind of person, and again, like in the at the time, there was no problem at all with corporate punishment, especially in grade school and high school. I got plenty of nun stories, but this particular guy, he would actually be throwing people up against the wall, and he would careen them down the hall into locker rooms, taking into lockers where you could hear the crashing going on, taking him to the principal. And so it's like, okay, I figure he caught me drawing cartoons, right? And he thought, and it was like, and it was like, okay, I'm about ready to get trashed. He was gonna shove me, through a plate glass window or something. And what he did was he picked up the papers that I was drawing on, and he got up in front of the class and he said, some people go through their entire career not knowing what they're going to be doing. And Mr. Dooley there is very lucky to have found his career in art at a very early age. And I was like, that sort of thing. Oh, yeah, okay, that sounds good. And so that, and then it was like my cousin who went to Pratt. It was like, okay, it's a design school, and that's what there was back in 1965. So it's like, okay, that's art, design, that sort of thing. They're connected, as you know, and so I went there, and it was like when he graduated, he was very successful to the point where, during recruitment, they actually had Ford Motor Company coming out and recruiting people on campus, or on canvas. And so his first job out of Pratt was to be hired as one of the designers at Ford Motor Company, and so it was like, go to Pratt. So I, applied, got into Pratt, and started taking design courses in industrial design, actually, because following in my cousin's footsteps. And then it's like we'd get together during the holidays. He'd come back, during Christmas time, that sort of thing. We'd all be sitting around the table, and I'd say, hey, how are things going at Ford? And he would just kind of shake his head and say, we punch in at 9, we punch out at 5, we go to the local bar and get drunk and trying to forget what we're doing. And basically what he was telling me was, he was giving me a preview of what Ralph Nader eventually published in Unsafe at Any Speed. This is Ralph Nader, the consumer advocate, not Ralph Nader, the election spoiler, as some of you may just know him as. And so it was like, yeah, okay, at that point, industrial design, no, not my thing. And so it was like I was looking around graphic design, and I was realizing how close a connection graphic design is to comics and narrative storytelling and the rest of it. And in fact, it's like there's the same thing from my perspective. Yeah. Comics are a subdivision of graphic design. And even when I was teaching history of graphic design, I would bring in cartoonists, comics artists, various people like that, and they would talk about. In fact, one of your guests, Arlen Schumer, actually put together a lecture for me that he's still using. I said, I'd like you to come to my class and talk about graphic design in comics. And he was like, yeah, I'm a graphic designer too, no problem. And he
Right.
He put together this spectacular presentation to my students, and it was like it was eye opening. So things like that were happening. So. It was just one of those things, and it was like when I became as I became an art director, my longest gig was 22 years. I was creative director at the LA Times out here, and that was one of those things where I would be assigning artists to do magazine covers and things like that, various illustrations. And so I was getting people like Peter Cooper and such to be able to put together these fantastic covers, and Peter's doing great. As usual, he's down at his in Artist Alley at his usual booth, right in the corner there as you walk in, and so that was a thrilling part of it. So I was always connected with that, and I'm old enough to right now, in terms of my own career, I'm retired from doing graphic design. It's like I'm born in 48, so just turned 71, and but I still write, and I still teach, and I still love it, and it's it's one of those things like if somebody asked me, well, what do you want to do when you're retired? I would say write and teach. The only difference is with having given up doing the design work, it's like, okay, I gave up, having clients. I can, write what I'm passionate about, which is, comics mostly and design, and also teach what I want to. Again, design and comics. And in fact, my column at my print magazine column is where I've been writing for print since 1990, 91. I'm a contributing editor there, so it's nice. And my thing, my subversion there is to write as much as I can about comics because I want other people to realize, how close a connection there is between comics and graphic design. So that's my hidden agenda there. And it was like before writing there, I was also writing for Fantagraphics publication, Amazing Heroes, and then Comics Journal. So that was where I was getting my writing chops originally.
I mean, at its base level, when you try to compare graphic design to comic books, for me, graphic design is really all about controlling the experience of the viewer.
Yes.
Where they go,
Right.
And comic books are a perfect example of that.
Yeah, look at any page, or if you really want to challenge, look at any Chris Ware page. Because he's also just a fantastic graphic designer, and he's pushing the envelope in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I had a guest on the podcast. His name is David Pepos. He's a writer, but he gave me an advanced review of his new issue of his book. It's called Spencer and Locke. Yeah. So,
okay.
For readers who don't know what Spencer Locke is, it's pretty much what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City. That's the way David describes it.
Nice.
But when I was reviewing it, I was prepping for my interview with him.
Right.
I told David, I said, David, this is like this book is so well designed, like the panel layouts. The gestalt of everything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's like, wow, I was so impressed. And I told him, based on my graphic design background, it's like, wow, I was giving high marks for the design of the panels, and all even the word bubbles were placed in nice areas for effect. So, I think graphic design is important to, proper comic book creation.
Yeah, that's my point of entry. I mean, I can and do judge books by their cover, especially, as speaking of Chris Ware, as Chip Kidd will tell you. But yeah, I just can't. If a comic doesn't have that graphic appeal to me, I don't even bother with it. I don't. I mean, you have to edit in some way. I've got a, gazillion books, magazines, and comics that I want to get around to reading. So that's my editing process. Usually is if I'm attracted to the design.
Now I'm impressed that you're both visual, but at the same time you're a prolific writer. I mean, I don't know a lot of artists quote that are really good at writing and sort of, explaining on the written page how to, how to express their points of view, conversely, the way they do visually.
Oh, well, thank you, Aaron. It's something that I hadn't really set out to do. I mean, I hadn't really set out to do teaching, and then I wound up teaching design, starting out back in the late 70s, and even with writing. Well, how my writing career started, it was okay. I'm going to start revealing some nepotism here. My the first article I wrote was for Amazing Heroes, and at the time, my brother Kevin Dooley was the editor of Amazing Heroes, and we were shooting the breeze as we tend to do about comics, since we're both. We've both been obsessed all our lives, and but I was also talking, in terms of design, and I started telling him about the kind of the difference between kitsch and camp, and he was, very curious about that. Tell me more. And so I wound up, and he said, could you write that up? Anyway, I wound up putting together a long interview. This is 1987, a long essay on, let's see, the four different areas that I covered were schlock, kitsch, camp, and funk. And so I wrote about them for Amazing Heroes, not just in terms of what they encompass, but also how they related to comics. When I would put various comics into each of those categories, and like the response I got was so great that it was like do more. And,
do you remember some of the examples that you used for each category?
Oh, okay. Wow. It's let me see. Well, funk. What immediately comes to mind is Gilbert Shelton's Wonder Warthog. So it's like everybody is now, they're hearing that Sheldon is, about to have a Freak Brothers cartoon coming out, and on the Facebook pages I follow, everybody was like, "No, to Wonder Warthog," and I'm like, "Yeah, get down with that," because the Freak Brothers are kind of a one-note joke, and schlock. I mean, that's just so much of the early days of that's pretty broad category. Kitsch is you can pick. So much of the the comics, especially in the early days of schlock comics, where it was just here's something that really sells a lot. Let's just go and put out. I mean, some of it was good schlock, but and you had all the crime comics and all the horror comics and the rest of it, that was it was something that was just being produced for mass market, again in the because in the 40s it was hot, and let's see, kitsch was more pretentious. It was like something that was trying to pretend to be art, and I put that. I put, say, Steranko's pseudo-surrealism in that category. I mean, yeah, Steranko's another person here, but it was like, he was doing all these things that everybody says, oh, look how great, these Captain America pages are, because because he ripped off the Kiriko and Dali without really transforming it. And it's like, you look at it and you know exactly what it is. I mean, there are ways, that you can do that it's not just, as pretentious as he was putting it together. And now let's say camp. Well, camp was the big thing, back in, of course, camp came out. The whole Susan Sontag thing, came out thanks to the Batman TV series, and let's see. Just a side note on Sontag. I mean, my article was critical, and I didn't particularly care for Sontag, and later one time saw her speak, and it was like I really don't care for her. After seeing her speak, it was like she was at this. UCLA lecture series, and she was to speak for an hour, and she came out, she got to the lectern, took out her notes, and read word for word everything in her notes, and it was like 59 minutes and 59 seconds after that she tidied up her notes and walked off the stage, to applause, but not by me, that sort of thing. It was like, I could have just stayed home and read this, right. that sort of thing. Right. And so, but
did she read it? Did she read it with feeling at least, or was it all monotone?
No, it was so monotone. It was like, and and it was like, and it didn't have to be that way. It was like, I saw in that same lecture series, I saw the great Time magazine art critic Robert Hughes come there, and he was so engaging. He talked to you like you really felt he was talking to like everyone in the audience.
Wow.
And I mean, to the point where afterwards it's like, he went over his time, but nobody cared because he was just so delightful. And he winds up, inviting all of us, this big crowd in a, UCLA auditorium. It's like, okay, I guess that wraps it up for now. Let's, anybody who wants to come join me for drinks, sort of, a human being. I love it. And this is all a little bit of padding to give me time to try to think about, the camp comics, just that whole so bad they're good sort of thing. I'm not a fan of that, basically because, I don't have time for comics and movies and, anything else in the camp category that is that is bad in any form, because there's just so much stuff that's great. I mean, even now you're telling me about Spencer and Luck, I got to go check that out. Mm-hmm. And I just don't have time for any kind of mystery science theater garbage. It's like, come on, I got a life. Come on, I'm old. I'm gonna die soon. I'm not gonna waste that. But I've always felt that.
Hopefully not too soon.
What's that?
Hopefully you don't die too soon.
Oh no, I have no plans. Yeah, I've got another good 20, 30 years at least. So, but yeah, that was that. So, and whatever Marvel was putting out comics that they were trying to take advantage of the pop art trend that they were calling camp, but that was kind of bogus camp. That was more kitsch camp sort of thing. But
you give them two of your categories.
Right. Yeah, it's a crossover.
Oh yeah,
like
crossover.
Marvel DC.
Right.
Wow, I gotta go bag that one.
Is that amalgam or something?
Right. Yeah. Right. That sort of thing. So. Yeah, so I mean, it's been great for me. It's been the idea of not retiring. It's like my class just keeps getting better and better with the guests I'm bringing in, and it was just like in just this past semester, the people I had. Well, I had Arlen preview a presentation that he wound up giving like a week or so later at Comic Fest, and and moving on, there was also Captured Oral Fantasy Theater, which if you're a regular attendee at Comic-Con, you know about them because basically they are a theater group that puts together, basically they do live performances of EC comics, and they actually took over my class one night and just staged this 2-hour spectacular, and one of the things that I my regular class I just I teach to students, but when I have guest speakers who are kind enough to come, it's like Art Center, I don't have the budget, but what I do is it's like would you come to my class, and they'd say yeah, and I was like I'm so flattered, so I take them out to dinner at least, and so this. This group, they just showed up, and so I make it open to the public. So it's like, people can come see, can get a free show of Capture Oral Fantasy Theater performance, which they're not doing one. They're skipping this year because they got other things going on. But this was, that was a performance there. And the big hit of this past semester was when I had together for the first time on the same stage, Howie Chaykin and Bill Sienkiewicz.
Oh wow!
Woo, my gosh! And to say that they were amazing is putting it mildly. And it was like when I announced it on, I got Facebook places I announced it on. I was, plus, Howie and Bill were spreading the word on their social media as well, and it was like, oh my God, I'm too far away. I'd kill to, and it was, I don't know if it was worth killing for, but it was spectacular, and it was just like so totally freeform and unexpected, and it was one of those things where they got to the auditorium before I did. So, and they just started, as Howard is wont to do, just start talking to people in the audience and exchange, and then Bill joined in, and the next thing you know, there's a conversation going on. By the time I got there, it was like I saw the dynamic, and it was like, whoop, no introduction needed,
right.
Just let them roll. And it was, it was just one of those wonderful things where they played off against each other. It's like the personalities are so different. The dynamics at work there between the two of them. There was just like so much energy, and people were realizing that it really was spectacular. And it was just one of those things where I didn't even think about asking them. It was just like Howard had given a talk on his stuff at my class before in a class in a semester before this, and had a good time. And so it's like he and Bill were exchanging, chatting on Facebook about this idea that they had, about doing something together, as a presentation, and Shakin said, now we need an outlet, and it was like, Michael Dooley? ?
Wow.
It was like, heck yeah, and sure enough, so that's how it grew. It's like, he volunteered himself and Bill to my class, and it was just, and for me, these are, in terms of the action adventure genre, these two are just top notch. They're high up in my pantheon. Way talk about masters of American comics. The kind of sharp wit and stylization. Shakin, whoa! You talk about graphic design. That's what he does. And Bill, it's like he is so top of my list. It's like one of those, how there are like. There are now these, X amount of places you have to go to before you die. Oh, we're getting a death theme I brought up here, a motif that we're going. This is, these are the places you have to go before you die. These are the books you have to read before you die. It's like, for me, when I read Bill's Stray Toasters, and it's like, okay, I can die. It was like it's just that good, and he is just just so amazingly talented, and and such a wonderful guy to boot, as anyone will tell you if they met Bill Sienkiewicz.
Awesome.
That sort of thing. So yeah. Question?
Yeah, sure. I guess maybe we can take a little break and we can do what we call a thunder round. It's like our off the beaten sort of set of questions that I like to ask our guests every once in a while.
Oh, okay.
So I guess the first one I would probably ask you if you were a color, what would you be?
Oh man, well, okay. So since we're both graphic designers, I should give you the Pantone number.
Oh,
right?
Wow. Coded or uncoded? No, I'm just kidding.
Uncoded is a lot. Who needs the gloss, right? Yeah, definitely. I would say uncoded teal.
That's a good one. If you could have dinner with anybody, dead or alive, even fictional, who would it be, and where would you take this person to eat? Oh,
well, it seems like, taking somebody dead to dinner is just, I don't think I could get past they wouldn't let me in. Well, obviously, I talked about it, before with Harvey Kurtzman. It's like he'd be someone, and I tell them, bring bring Bill as a guest, because for me and what we talk about mostly, I guess, to some restaurant that serves chicken fat, I would, for me, the pinnacle of Harvey and Bill. Their career was the Goodman Beaver stuff that they did in Help. I mean, as it is, Harvey Kurtzman's executive comic book, and the Jungle Book, those paperbacks that he did way back when, where he was working out the whole Goodman Beaver character. Those were great. But then, if you go to those Help magazines, and you seek out the ones where Kurtzman and Elder just did Super Duper Man. I mean, it just, the first panel of Super Duper Man alone, Goodman meets, or not Super Duper, that's Kurtzman going way back. This is a Goodman Beaver meets Superman with asterisks for the vowels. And the first page was just so complex. It was just this street scene in New York. The tenements, the bricks, the fire escapes, the muck and all. And there's this Candide character, Goodman Beaver, walking through all this crime and corruption and being like totally oblivious to it. And it was just so detailed that I wound up. I spent I don't know how long just copying it. When I was a kid, it was I was whatever. I don't even think I was 10 at the time. But I just I really wanted to see I really wanted to study this thing, how it worked. So I was like transcribing the master, that sort of thing. And the more I drew it, the more the more respect I had for the two of them. In addition to the rich satire of that and Goodman Goes Playboy, of course, and with the Archie Andrews crowd, that was these are highlights that I've never seen surpassed in terms of satire for me. Mm-hmm. At that time, everybody, each generation has their own. But yeah, I would take Harvey and Bill to a deli and just ask, bombard them with a zillion questions, that I really do have about. I mean, of course, I teach, I teach these things in my class, and I'm going, look, and even students wind up, coming up with all sorts of questions and about it, just seeing it, because it's just that, even today, here 2019, it's like, this is. What stuff that was done in 1963, 60, and it's still speaking to them in a way that so much of Mad the comic has just become too disassociated with what's going on now, But there are that whole Goodman Goes Playboy, selling your soul to the devil sort of thing, where Archie was able to party like it was 1999 in 1964 because he had sold his soul to the devil, and his time was up, and spoiler alert, it was like everybody saw how even though Harvey wound up being burned to a crisp at the end, like the fall of the Roman Empire, he because the devil took his soul, it was like still everybody else wanted to sign up, and to be able to all Reggie and Jughead and the rest of them wanted to have that Playboy lifestyle. And of course it was parodying Hugh Hefner as well as parodying John Goldwater, but obviously the Archie people were the ones without the sense of humor, and so there was trouble with that for a while, where it couldn't be in print. But at the end of it, it's like the very last the very last word balloon on the very last page was Goodman saying, well, I guess it's time to take off, and and find other things to do. And then it was like, maybe I should sign up anyway. So there were, one of the conversations I had was, okay, with Harvey going to specifically to Playboy to do Little Annie Fanny. It was like, okay, was he, selling his soul to the devil for bukus of money and parties at the mansion and the rest of it,
right?
That's that sort of thing. So it's like that kind of conversation. The students love that, to be able to explore all the aspects of selling it, and because they're students, they're design students. The class I'm teaching, it's an elective class, so I get people from all of the design departments coming in, in addition to graphic design. There's entertainment design, illustration, film, because, storyboards, and, package design. People find things that, that they get in my class, which is...
Are any of your students here?
Let's see. No. It's not that I know of, but some of them may have gone off, and because I run in, I just never know who I'm going to run into, and that sort of thing. In addition to meeting people, and that's part of the fun too. Anyway, offhandedly, no, I don't. I don't think nobody's gotten as fanatical as I am. I don't think. But yeah, okay. So Kurtzman, Deli, Goodman Beaver.
Cool, like a New York deli or any
of
deli?
course.
Do you have a favorite deli in New York that you go to?
Oh wow, it's been so long. I think all the delis I know have probably closed. I came out here in 1974.
What made you decide to move out here in the first place?
Interesting. Well, okay, just in general, New York was, we're talking about the city, was turning into a hellhole, and it was not the most pleasant place to live. And as a graphic designer, you'll appreciate this. It's like in my history of graphic design class, of course, I talk about Milton Glaser, and I talk about his I Heart New York.
Right.
And I say, this is an icon. This is someone that something that's recognized everywhere. People were ripping it off from from the minute it was out, where suddenly you were seeing bumper stickers, I heart my Cocker Spaniel, and this and that sort of thing. Just, all sorts of products. And the idea was to make people feel good about living in New York. But the thing of it is, that's all it did. It was like, to think that I Heart New York changed anything about New York or made people want to change anything about New York other than their attitude, no, that sort of thing. So, again, this is, something, this is part of my teaching, is that I have, I try to, introduce that, if not outright cynicism, which you can see obviously I have, but at least a skepticism, an idea of questioning, which, again, 7-year-old Harvey Kurtzman, there I am. But, so, and on top of that, it was like my first wife and I had just had a baby, Chris Dooley, who is now doing motion graphics, animation, that sort of thing.
That's cool.
As well as directing, and and he got into it because I remember taking him to a movie, E.T., and at the Cinerama Dome when it first came out, and I remember him walking out saying, "When I grow up, I want to be Steven Spielberg." So he's working on that. But it was like, okay, we were living, the three of us living in a basement apartment in Jersey City. I was like, I don't think this is an environment a good environment for. Tell you what, Chris, is young, 9 months old, and we'll drive across. We'll take him across country. So we drove across to Southern California, to LA, with the idea of, being, that kind of, Saul Steinberg New Yorker cover, New York snob, but, saying, well, of course, we're going to get back to the real world in 5 years. It's just, to give Chris a little, pleasant environment to go, to grow up in. And then, of course, you get out here and it's like, whoa, you realize, sure, there are these, these stereotypes, but, the wonderful people, the wonderful comic book conventions, just in Southern California alone. So that's, we just decided to say it that, we were young. It's like, we didn't have a job. I didn't have a job lined up.
Oh, wow.
And it was just like, okay, we're kids. We can do it.
Right.
That sort of thing. We got a baby. Car seat. Hop into the Tercel and drive cross country. And so, we got, so, and then, the next thing, I'm working at the LA Times giving assignments to Arlen Schumer and Peter Cooper.
Oh, so that's how you know Arlen.
I what?
So that's how you met Arlen?
No. Oh, how I met Arlen. This is interesting. And I had written before I started working at Print Magazine. Before they hired me as a contributing editor, I was doing work for the Comics Journal, and one of the things that the Comics Journal, one of the things that Print Magazine at the time put out was they put out a comics issue, a special issue devoted to comics that it had all sorts of great, Arlen had a story in it. Gary Groth was in there. Just a bunch of really important people writing a bunch of really important essays about comics. And this is in like 1986, 7, maybe 1980. Basically it was like that era when everything was that was the Watchmen, Mouse, Dark Knight time. And so it was time for that, and Print picked up on it. And so I wrote a review of that. I wrote a review of that for the Comics Journal, and complimenting where compliment was due. But it was like I didn't really care for the cover, and I noticed, okay, the cover. I wrote in the essay. Arlen did a great job on his essay, but Arlen's done better covers, that sort of thing. And so shortly after that, I was giving a talk at some place, I'm guest lecturer all over the place. And, so I give my talk, and as I'm walking off the dais, this guy comes up to me and says, introduces himself. Hey, I'm Arlen Schumer. And I said, oh, hi, Arlen. And he said, that thing you wrote about my cover of Print Magazine. And I immediately, without skipping a beat, and I said, yeah, what happened? I mean, you've done some great, terrific stuff. And I realized at that point that, I was in the right, I was doing the right thing, because I've always said anything I write, about anybody, I want to be able to say to their face. I want to be able to, if I criticize somebody, I want, and, it was at that moment that I, without even thinking it happened, and I realized, yes, I can do that, and I still do that sort of thing. But anyway, so Arlen and I, got through that, and but it was also that issue of Print Magazine that Arlen was so involved with that made me decide I'm going to send some of my stuff, my tear sheets of the stuff I've been writing for the Comics Journal to print, and seeing if I can become a writer there. And so I got together, I picked out articles, sent them stuff. I didn't send them the review I did of Print Magazine, which the comics issue, which was somewhat critical, but I sent them other things, and knowing them, I probably, I'm sure I could have sent, and they would have loved it. But so I sent them, and I said, okay, there's this at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It's called High and Low. It was basically where Museum of Modern Art was taking Kirk Varnado, who was the curator at the time, was picking out artworks to compare them with advertising, graffiti, comics, that sort of thing. And it was like, of course, high was Museum of Modern Art, and low, was that other, stuff, comics, graffiti,
Sure.
no difference, right? And and so, I mean, comics and advertising, that cover of Mad the Comic, yes. So I wrote and I said, and I'd really like to review their catalog. They're putting out this big voluminous catalog on the show. And so I heard back from Carol Stevens, the editor, who said, no, we want you to review the show. And it was like, I was in LA at the time, and it was, okay, they flew me out. I reviewed the show as well as, so I had a whole, my first thing there at print was a feature that was focused on comics. Mm-hmm. And, it was like, okay, I'm still doing the thing. And so 1990, and I've been doing it since then. And so, so I can, I can have that through line to, to Arlen appearing in print, and, to whatever extent he had, in putting that together, to, me realizing, okay, I'm going to go for, I'm going to go and apply. And I work, it's like, so I met them when I flew back, and they said, I remember the guy in charge, the editor, Marty Fox, he was like, he said, Mike, I'd like you to become a contributing editor. And I was like, oh, really? What does that involve? It's like, I'm just starting there. And he said, well, basically, that and a quarter will get you on the subway. So I said, I'll take it. So, name on the masthead since then.
Nice. That's awesome. Just sort of touching on Arlen just a little bit. You heard my podcast with him that I did at San Diego Comic-Con 2018.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, that was one of the best experiences I had here at San Diego Comic-Con that I can remember, because we spent like 2 or 3 hours on that podcast together, and then we hung out for another 2 or 3 hours after that at dinner.
Yes.
And he continued to school me on pop culture and all these things, and it was just like, who does that? I mean, who takes he could have been out there networking with other people, but yet he chose that to give that time to me. So I thought that was pretty cool of him to do that.
Yeah, and and I've written about Arlen in print a couple of times, in addition to the first time at the Comics Journal, and the main one that I did was on his presentations, his what he calls visual lectures, and because his presentations are unparalleled. When, I mean, for me, another gripe I have about going to a lot of the panels there is it's like they don't bother to add visuals. Again, it's got like the Comics Arts Conference. Oh, let's just talk, and just assume everybody knows everything we're going to be referencing here, and so, with him, it's like, for an hour talk, he will give, how many gazillion slides will he put in there? And it just goes like that, bam, bam, bam. And the rest of it, and his enthusiasm comes out,
yep.
His showmanship and the rest of it. I mean, for that, he's unparalleled, and I'm so grateful for that. I had him talk with my, like I mentioned, my graphic design students and my history of comics students, just purely, on that, because you sit there and you're riveted. It's like, nobody. I don't have to worry about anybody looking down to check, their text messages when Arlen, is up front. So
definitely,
he definitely, deserves all those props for that. I mean, even sometimes when I have guests, it's like, the guests just want to come. For me, it's like, Okay, I know they're not going to have not going to put together any slides, but I'll put together slides. I'll either have a cycle through of slides of the work that I know they're going to be talking about, or in the case of the first Chaikin talk I gave, I actually. That was more like this was me interviewing him, and basically I had all my questions related to this slideshow I put together, and of course it was like so my slides were my cues about, okay, I'm going to ask you about this, that sort of thing, and so the students could see, because these students they're coming in from all these different I can't assume any knowledge at all. It's like tabula rasa when it comes to comics, so I need to show them, and people are going to know Kirby, people are going to know manga and anime and the rest of it.
Oh, nice.
And, and even then it's select people. So, so I never assume, I always show them, and I find out what they like, and I, kind of gear my talks accordingly, to that sort of thing.
I also want to touch on your comment about high art and low art.
Yes.
My friend Orlando Arocena, he's good a fine artist.
Yes.
But he's a graphic designer also, and he's what I would call a vector art god.
Oh,
so
okay.
he's fighting that battle, trying to, I guess, have vector art have the same recognition as fine art. So. He grew up in New York, so he sort of faced that battle in all the art shows out there, where all the fine art shows were poo-pooing his vector art. So,
right.
But now he's like, he's become a good representative of the vector art movement, because he collaborates with this group called Poster Posse, and they do all these tribute. Well, they started doing all these tribute projects for all the movies that come out, and now they're getting officially licensed by a lot of the studios. So,
and so. Are these things showing up in galleries around the city? Or?
I'm not sure about that, but they are starting to get more notoriety, and they're trying to get support by a lot of the movie studios now, who are contracting them for the promotional work. So I don't know if his work is showing up in art galleries now, but who knows? Later on the road, it'll reach that point. I mean, his artwork is his technical ability is just off the chains crazy. I usually say what good vector artists can do in 6 days, he can do in 6 hours. He's that fast and he's that good. I don't know how the hell he does it. So I'm always amazed by what he does, because he shares he shares his sort of progression shots.
YouTube videos.
Sort of, yeah. But even his stills, and you see all the vector points and everything. Yeah. It's it just blows your mind. Mm-hmm. So So I recommend our listeners go check out Orlando Arocena. He goes by Mexifunk. I think that's his website, mexifunk.com. So
MEXIFUNK.
Yes.
.com.
Yeah. He's a really cool guy. He's living. I think he's living in Colombia right now. Him and his wife, but I think they're trying to come back to the States. So. He's a cool guy, and I've been trying to get him on the podcast, but we'll see what happens. Yeah,
do that. It's well. First off, are you familiar with Bart Beatty's book, the Comics versus Art, which gets into that whole discussion? I mean, that's that's a paperback size book that just basically gets into, just explores the thing from all sorts of different angles, Roy Lichtenstein and the rest of it, and of course and contemporarily they're talking about Spiegelman and where, and
is Lichtenstein the one with the red square? Is that
the red square?
Who's the artist who created the red square and it sold for millions of dollars?
You're talking about the Soviet artist Malevich?
I'm not sure. I could have sworn it was Lichtenstein, but I could be wrong.
Oh, Red Square?
Yeah.
Maybe Robert Rauschenberg, if you want. Yeah, if we're in that era. But it would have its roots in the 1920s constructivist, early 20s constructivist movement, suprematism specifically. That was the famous black square that was painted. It was one of those paintings where it was a black square painted on a white canvas, and it was hung up in a place of honor. The place of honor in a museum is like in the corner, so it's 45-degree angle, that sort of thing. Whenever you see pictures of a show of suprematism, you'll see that up there, because it's kind of, for them it was like painting, boiled down to its essence. It's like, people were throwing out, superlatives, like, okay, after black square, nobody needs to do any more painting. Of course, like everything else, it's, hype.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, to get into that argument, that discussion, you first have to make sure that your definitions are clear enough, and which is something that we talk about. I mean, even graphic design, fine art. It's like, okay, what do you mean by fine art? Because in my graphic design history class, I talk about the turn of the century fine art movements. From Picasso's Cubism to Dada and Surrealism, Futurism and Expressionism. All those early 20th century movements, and I talk about how they connect with graphic design, and I do it somewhat in the comics and animation class as well. But yeah, you have to figure out if that's part of the opening discussion. It's like, okay, here I am at LMU and I'm teaching history of design, and you go to another class at LMU and they're teaching history of art. It's like, so there's a difference, right? And then we get into that whole, okay, what is fine art, and how do you define graphic design? I was like, okay, graphic design's working for a client. Fine art is self-expression, and then you get into the nuances of, it's like the Sistine Chapel ceiling was a commission job, that sort of thing. But then again, that was a gazillion years. Okay, so it's like, and even if you had that discussion, you could say, okay, fine art, completely free of any influence. It's like, despite, I mean, you could point to Picasso's Guernica, but again, that was an assigned job, and but it was approached with enough independence that it was like, it was his. And then you take, you go back to, then you point to, say you're a friend, or illustration, graphic design, comics, whatever it is. If it's for a client, it's like, okay, you're serving the client, and so I don't think of it as an either or. I see it as like on a continuum. It's like, to the extent that you're satisfying the client, sure, you're a professional graphic designer. But to the extent that you put yourself into it, you're an art. And this really became crystallized with the postmodern movement. When you had terrific post-modern graphic designers like April Greiman and Rudy Vanderlands and Zuzana Lichko coming in, at the same time as the introduction of the Macintosh, which gets back to your vector friend.
Sure.
And so they were practicing it with more independence than ever before. So they were the ones that were like, more clearly moving that line of, because there's no hard line of demarcation. It's on a scale. It's like, they were doing stuff that, Paul Rand hated April Greiman's work. I mean, just so many of those old school modernists were, with Paul Rand, it's bad enough she's a woman, that sort of thing, which was also pissing him off. The whole postmodern movement sort of thing, fighting against, it was like, battling against modern. And Paul Rand was saying, that's not graphic design, that's art. And it's like, it's like, whatever, you can't walk and chew gum at this. It's the same thing.
I think that's sort of the wrong sort of comparison. I think the term you should probably use is art and commercial art, because I mean, when you think of art, like say what the artists back in the day used to just paint for themselves, they only had one audience, themselves.
Right.
Versus commercial art, usually where graphic design is sort of lumped in, but I mean, you can still do graphic design that's not commercial. It could be for like a project that's not, for money.
Okay.
But when it comes to commercial art, I mean, you're taking your client's audience into account.
Sure.
So there's more of an audience than just the one person, yourself. So
Yeah.
I mean that's my sort of take on commercial art versus art.
Well, let's see if I understand you correctly. By not adding the word fine art, it's like once you have fine art and commercial art, you're talking about two different things. But when you say art and commercial art, basically there it sounds like, okay, you're putting commercial art and fine art under the same umbrella of just like art,
Yes.
which is which is fine.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I'm down with that.
And for the audience, I looked up that red square that I was talking about earlier, and it's a Rothko.
Okay, yeah, soft edges, but that's okay. Anyway, and that's the title of it, Red Square.
Red Square, and it sold for
okay.
$75 million at Sotheby's.
Oh.
So
There you go.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I immediately went to Russia because Red Square.
Right, exactly. Yeah, of course.
Anyway, okay, yeah.
That could be a bar in Russia.
Yeah.
I guess just to continue on the Thunder Round, an extended Thunder Round. If you were to hang up art, let's pretend you were president of the United States, and you had a choice of artwork to hang up in the Oval Office. What would you put up there?
Okay, I guess I should skip getting political right now.
You can get political. It's up to you.
Okay, I'm president. It's like, I'm, my qualifications, I think that was an absurd question. I would have thought that was an absurd question, up until 2016. And now it's like, my baby cat, Lindy, could be okay, so, all right, what art would I put up in the White House?
Mm-hmm. In the Oval Office.
Oval Office.
Yeah.
Oh, even better. Okay. Wow, that is, I would. Okay, I can make this a short answer by referring to something that I already talked with. I would go find Dennis Kitchen and pay him and have the government pay him $1 gazillion to get me the first page of Goodman Meets Superman, the one that I copied hand by hand. It's like, give it all to Dennis. He's and that's what I'd like to see. The original artwork of that, because that's so much tied in with power and what can be done with it and these different attitudes. I mean, basically, Superman's attitude. He even says this specifically during the story. He said, "People are no damn good," mm-hmm. And it was like it's like he's given up being Superman. It's because just screw all. These people don't deserve to be helped. And whereas Goodman has this idealized vision. He sees that things can be better and so it's that kind of conflict of, a lot of people are no damn good, and but of course now I'm just thinking of voters in the last presidential election. I exaggerate, but that's the idea. That would be what that kind of power, that kind of being having that much power, the greatest power in the free world. I would like to keep those perspectives in mind. It's like, people can be no damn good, but there it is worth striving to, in your own individual way, to do the best you can, to achieve whatever you can, and that sums it up.
Cool. I guess we can go back to a few questions I wanted to ask you
Sure.
concerning some of your articles before we close out the show.
Oh, please.
I'm a huge Anthony Bourdain fan. And but I haven't had a chance to check out his graphic novels yet. But you do have an article here that you wrote in Print Magazine about fear and hunger in Japan on Anthony Bourdain's last graphic novel that was called Hungry Ghost.
Yes.
I mean, why did you pick that one to review?
Well, I tell you how that came was this was I have complete independence in terms of what I can pick. It's like nobody is telling me, I want you to do a story on me. So it was one of those things where Karen Berger, who's just as wonderful. I mean, Vertigo. Right. Yes, thank you for Vertigo.
Rest in peace, Vertigo.
And she started Berger Books right around that time, and so I looked at it, and I looked at the Hungry Ghosts, and I said, from a graphic design standpoint, it's like, this is one that deserves attention because it's got, the 7 different artists, each bringing different skills to it. Mm-hmm. It's basically these 7, these stories that people, the whatever Canterbury tales of the dark side, and it was impressive enough, and it's like my wife watches the cooking shows and that sort of thing. I mean, it's like I know who Guy Fieri is,
Right.
So I was coming into it not knowing anything about.
So no Flavor Town for you, right?
No. Is that what? I don't even know what that is.
That's one of his terms, like I'm going to take it to Flavor Town or something like that.
Oh, play on Funky Town or something like that. Okay, is this Guy?
Yeah, Guy Fieri.
Okay, yeah. And so knowing nothing about it, it's like okay, this is an opportunity for me to learn something, and so when I talked with Karen after she was whatever it was when she was at some convention, it was probably San Diego Comic-Con when I when
she did make an appearance at San Diego Comic Fest a couple of years ago.
I missed her at that. But it was Comic-Con. She was introducing. It was a rollout sort of thing, and at the time it hadn't even. This was like pre-rollout, and I was talking with them, the people on the panel, and it was like that one was the one that looked most interesting because it was like they were showing slides, which again, thank you, for doing that, for realizing that people that are interested in a graphic medium actually want to see things while they're watching a talking head for an hour, and so it was just one of those things where for me it's like I'm as a graphic designer I'm looking at it from graphic design since it's like this is something that's worth sharing, and it's also something I can learn from. It's like for me it takes me a long time to write anything, and it's like it's not only writing, it's the editing, which is basically like, for me, I never had lessons in, writing journalism for that matter. I never, it was something I fell into. Blame Kevin, as long as you're blaming Kevin for things. But it was just like I saw that, okay, writing and editing, it's like, okay, I'm the designer and I'm the creative director. So it's like, once I transpose that into there, it was like I can do these things. And actually, I did talk one time when I was at the LA Times. They had some guy who was helping out special sections writers on how they could be writing better. And so he was there for a couple of weeks, and I asked him. I said, it takes me a heck of a long time to write. And he was like, okay, here's what you got to do. First thing you do is you figure out what you're going to write about. You make an outline of, where you're going to go, beginning, middle, end, and that sort of thing. And then you just go out and fill in, you just plug in those things. And it was like, oh, that's how you write fast? That's not why I write at all. Every single thing I do to write is to find out something, to discover. For me, it's a process of discovery. like design. It's like, here's a problem. How can we,
Right, exactly.
how can we come, to, something that's very satisfying, that, that meets, so many needs.
Right.
Design such a, complex field, so rich. Anyway, so that's Bourdain.
Yeah.
And extra bonus. So, and you had another, please.
Sure. The next one I want to talk about is Blazing Combat, when the U.S. Army banned a comic book about war.
And
the reason that stood out to me is because I just interviewed a friend of mine, Jason Inman. He had a book, his first prose book. He's a comic book writer, but it was called Super Soldiers, and he sort of contrasted the superheroes and villains that were portrayed in the United States military in comic books and pop culture versus his experience in the Middle East as an army soldier. So I thought
I want to find out more about this.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty fascinating. But when I saw you wrote this article about a comic book that was banned, during war, I wanted to ask you about that. So.
Oh yeah, well it was the military wouldn't allow it. They perceived a bias on the part of the editor and publisher Warren, and for me it was like well of course that they're basically Archie and company were resurrecting frontline combat and two-fisted tales and that sort of thing. They were doing their take, and it was it was worth noting. And I think there may have also been a tie-in with something else that was happening. I tend to like to make things newsworthy, but if even just in the opening graph or the lead, but just for me in general, it was like this is one of the many ways that Harvey Kurtzman's legacy is continuing, and
Gotcha.
and there's some there was some great worthy work, and and if you look at my pieces, you'll see that I always, as much as possible, I put a lot of images in it. I mean, this is I'm talking about people who talk it for an hour without showing anything. For me, as much as I can, I think there was like one I had like 80 or 90 images or something. I don't think I've quite reached 100, but you can aspire, can't you? So basically, then that's part of the fun of it too, is being that editor, is going into, and because I put these pages together basically myself, and I structure them, and it's like, okay, here's the lead, and here's what needs to be, here's the image that needs to go on the the top first thing people see when they and so it's like, and so I'm actually working, for me, putting together those pages is like, being a comics editor to the extent that it's like word and image. It's like you're reading about something and then boom, there's an image or several images, and I'm doing the tie-in. I mean, it's one of those things that like maybe a graphic designer might notice, but nobody else will.
Right.
But that's like, I don't care, I'm doing it. And
awesome.
I'm having fun doing it, I'm enjoying,
I guess
doing
that's
that
the important
sort of
thing, to have fun with
Yeah,
what you
so
do.
it's like, so I, this is, when you look at Blazing Combat, the illustrations that I pick, you can see my taste in those stories.
Mm-hmm. And the last one I want to talk about is Beyond Black Panther, a celebration of Black comics creators. It's funny because I saw this and I was like, my friend Keithan Jones, he's from Kid Comics, and he organized a one-day convention here in San Diego called Black Comics Day. And John Jennings was there the first year.
There you go.
And I wanted to pick up this book, but they ran out before I could get to it. Why did you want to review this book? And I only bring up this book because today is Friday at San Diego Comic-Con, and usually my friend Uraeus, he also goes by Black Heroes Matter. they're having a flash mob today.
Oh, really?
They have it every Friday, usually at the some part of the front of the convention center where everybody gets together. They have a photo op right there, and they celebrate that occasion every year.
Oh, wonderful!
So 6 o'clock every Friday at San Diego Comic-Con. So I saw this article that you wrote, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to ask Michael about this. So I mean, why did you pick this book to review?
I had I met John at a convention. It was a local convention held at UC Northridge, held at Northridge University, and it was one of those things that was put together. It was a small one, but it was put together by Charles Hatfield, who's been a friend of mine for a long time. Really great guy. He is someone who really knows his stuff. Someone who I've had a couple of times speak at my class because he actually is one of the academics from a literary background who really gets into and gives equal time to visuals. So he put together these comic events, basically little convention sort of things, and that's where I met John and started talking with him, and just seeing his presentation, seeing the amazing stuff he was showing, and it was like again, even before seeing the books, it's like I want to do something about this. And of course here, beyond Black Panther, there's that was obviously a tie-in when Black Panther the movie was getting a lot, so there was that hook. But it was like, it was an opportunity to do that, and also to, have something in the head that people might notice, that might otherwise notice, and to do that was, it's like, here are other things. Basically, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to, share, my joys, the things that get me excited, and chatting with John and all was just, it was just wonderful. So yeah, I got to
nice,
got to do that.
Before we close out the show, I want to, since we're at San Diego Comic-Con, we're celebrating 50 years of San Diego Comic-Con. Is there a memory out there that sort of you have a certain fondness for, of your experiences here at San Diego Comic-Con?
Okay, let me think of the early days of. I'm trying to remember. Like I say, I go back to 1975. So one of my earliest memories was that was one in which I was like, going around, to the different. I can't remember. May have been late 70s, early 80s, maybe, where I was just going out. Around the tables, looking at things in the dealer's room, and there was this modest table set up with with kitchen sink comics, and it was and so I saw the Howard Cruz's stuff, and including one of his most recent. So I was picking it up and leafing through it, and the guy behind the desk said, oh, you like Barefoots? And I was like, yeah, I'm really impressed with the graphics. And he started engaging in this conversation, and it was like, this was just such a fresh air breath compared to everybody else. It was, they're like, sideshow park. Come on, get over here. Look at these great things. It was like, he was talking with me like, relating as a human being and that sort of thing. And man, it was Dennis Kitchen. And it was from then that I became a loyal fan of his, and nice. Since then I've done articles, but it was like wow, a human being actually at an exhibitor booth, and back in those days, even then it was so much of the hustler sort of thing that this was just like, oh, thank you for for finding humanity among the hawkers, that sort of thing. And I did so I've written articles, I've introduced him once when he was on a spotlight thing here at Comic-Con, and and one of the things, one of the early profiles I did of Dennis Kitchen, it was funny. I wrote this profile, that was online, and then it was like I was going to introduce him at a panel. So I thought, okay, let's see what Wikipedia, Wikipedia you take with a ton of salt.
Yeah.
And so I was reading through Wikipedia's entry, and I'm going, wow, this sounds familiar. And I read through the thing, a couple of paragraphs, and it was like, wait a minute, I wrote this. So it's like, sure enough, I looked down and there was a connection, a link to the article.
Oh my gosh.
I had written on. So yeah, that was it. Anyway, Dennis, just, God, wonderful guy.
Nice.
Really good.
I've been to a panel that Rob Salkowitz did featuring Dennis Kitchen a few years ago, and I think he has another panel here at San Diego Comic-Con. I forget which day it was that Dennis Kitchen is the featured person on his panel that he's moderating. So
yeah, always worth seeing.
Yeah, definitely. Before I let you go, is there anything that you'd like to share with our audience that we haven't covered yet?
Oh, what? Well, let's see. I don't know when it's going to be broadcast, but I mean, I'm just looking forward to seeing the rest of what's going on at the convention. I got all my panels for Friday and Saturday picked out, and but other than that, I guess what I would say to to people who are interested in reading what I've been writing, seeing some of the stuff, which I started writing in. Print basically started up their online presence in July of 2010. So I've been writing since I was part of that initial launch, and I've been writing since then. So I've got there are a couple of hundred articles, just spanning the field. Something for everybody.
Right.
And so that is printmag.com, printmag.com/author/Michael Dooley, and so that's for the reading part of my retirement career, and then for the guest speaker part of my retirement career, you would be able to get in touch with me through Facebook, and I'm also going to be starting up on Instagram to make announcements of guest speakers that are coming up. Like I mentioned, the guest speaker talks are always free. I mean, even Art Center in Pasadena, California. Any of your listeners there, even the parking is free. So it's and so it's spring and fall semesters. So I'll be starting up in September. And you can get in touch with me, and I can put you on the list. And it's on Facebook right now. That's where I've been making the announcement for several years, but now I've decided to expand to Instagram because Facebook, that's just for old people.
because you're visual.
Exactly. Oh yeah, I've never posted anything on Facebook that's just been a statement. I always have to include an image. There's either my own image or a link.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Aaron, for having me. This has been great
pleasure
fun.
and really insightful, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Terrific.
Cool.
Me too.
That's the show. Peace, cheers, and talk to you later.